Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another ship fitting guide for Eve Echoes. In today's video we're going to be taking a long overdue look at the Serpentis Corporation Vigilant. This has been a very popular request and I'm sorry that it's taken me this long to actually get around to sitting down and recording this one. So what we're going to do in today's video, of course, is we'll have a look at what the Serpentis Corporation Vigilant is, how it works, what its different stats, attributes and fittings are. Then we'll have a look at a couple of ways to fit this before undocking it and actually showcasing it in action. It is a very powerful cruiser. As you'd expect, it is a faction cruiser. It's very expensive to build and very expensive to fit. Losing one of these things is going to hurt your wallet quite a bit. Fortunately, however, it is also extraordinarily powerful, which makes it very survivable in PvP as well. It's not an easy target to take down at all. Now, if you do enjoy this video, let me know by hitting a like on it, sub to the channel for all things Eve Echoes, ding that notification bell to never miss an upload, and of course, let me know in the comment section down below what ships, what topics you want to see in future content. Now, like this one, sometimes it does take a bit of time, so thank you to all for your patience. If you've requested a video, do be sure I'm probably looking into filming it. Now, if you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel as well, we do have a Patreon, and we have a Redbubble merchandise store. So if you've ever fancied representing this channel, the Silent Rose, the Catskull Academy, etc., on things like hoodies, t-shirts, stickers, notepads, all that kind of jazz, do check out the link on screen now and in the description below. That said and done then, let's jump right in to talking about the Serpentis Corporation Vigilant. The Serpentis Corporation are one of the 5 pirate factions currently available in Eve Echoes, alongside the Angel Cartel, who they have very close ties with, the Blood Raider Covenant, Guristas Pirates, and Sanchez Nation, all conveniently grouped up here on the right-hand side of the select faction screen. Now, the Serpentis Corporation was founded originally a few decades ago by Verge Salvador Serpati. At first, it was engaged in legitimate high-tech research, but with time its ties with the underworld grew, and the Serpentis research stations scattered around in remote areas of Nullsec ended up becoming infamous pirate havens. Serpati himself made a deal with the Angel Cartel early on to provide protection for his stations, and this duty was taken on by the Guardian Angels. Both sides have prospered enormously from this deal. Serpentis can operate in peace, and the Angel Cartel gets access to the illegal research efforts of the Serpentis Corporation. Now, it's strongly believed that the Serpentis Corporation is the main developer and manufacturer of illegal neural boosters, especially since Serpati's father was a renowned specialist in that field. It's also believed that they are the source of various of the new illegal drugs washing through the Galente Federation markets. The home of the Serpentis Corporation is in the Phoenix constellation in the Fountain region, so you will not be able to claim sovereignty in that space, but it does make a good place to start looking if you're looking specifically for Serpentis Corporation anomalies. Obviously, the Serpentis Corporation do spread out from there further into various other regions of Galente Nullsec. If you're drifting through those areas, you may find a Serpentis Corporation dead space anomaly, and if you and your mates clear out that dead space anomaly, amongst the wreckage and the loot, you should hopefully find some Serpentis Corporation debris. You can then use that debris to reverse engineer the blueprints for the Daredevil, the Vigilant, and the Vindicator. And of course, it is the Vigilant that we're going to be looking at in this video. This was the first design that the Guardian Angels stole from the Galente Federation, and it would certainly not be the last. The Vigilant is, of course, a heavily modified thorax, and if you look at it, it is the exact same hull as the thorax. The only difference here, really, visually at least, is the colour. Obviously, whereas the Galente Federation thorax has that Galente sea green detailing all over it, and the Galente Federation flags emblazoned on the back, here with the Vigilant, it's sort of that slate greyish black colour for the detailing, with the Serpentis Corporation emblems emblazoned at the rear of the ship instead. Obviously, by the time you can see those markings, though, chances are it's already too late for you. Now, there have been some people who have asked in previous developer Q&As, will the Vigilant and the Vindicator ever get their own unique hulls? Obviously, the Vigilant is a modified thorax, and the Vindicator, which is the Serpentis battleship, is essentially a reskinned Megatron. Now, ultimately, as I just mentioned, the backstory of the Vigilant is a stolen and modified design from the Galente Federation. That means ships are big, expensive things that are difficult to design and difficult to make. I don't mean in terms of development time here for NetEase and CCP, I mean in sort of the backstory. It takes a lot to actually design a ship that works well together, so they tend to steal blueprints and use those. It's why the Gerstus pirates look like a Merlin, a Moa, and a Scorpion. And it's why here the Vigilant looks like a Thorax, the Vindicator looks like a Megatron, it's even why the Balgorn looks like an Armageddon and stuff like that. It's because they are using shared blueprints. As such, there's a part of me that doesn't actually want to see them get their own unique hulls. The ones that are unique hulls, like the Daredevil, the Succubus, the Sanchez Nation ships, and indeed the Angel Cartel ships, are mainly because their blueprints have been heavily based on other more esoteric things. Like the Angel Cartel are heavily based on Jove designs, and Sanchez Nation, the whole point of Sanchez Nation being so weird is that we don't know where they're getting that tech from. And that's a big part of the story. So I don't think it's really necessary that the Serpentis Corporation do get unique designs here for the Vigilant or the Vindicator. I think it's actually part of the story, and it gives the ship some character to show that it is essentially a modified and stolen Thorax. Anyway, all that said and done then, let's actually jump in and talk about how this one flies. If we start off then looking at the Vigilant's fitting profile, we can see that it's got one drone tube. This can launch either small or medium drones, and is purely supplemental damage to help you deal with things like frigates and destroyers that otherwise may have come under your guns. The main damage output, of course, comes from the 5 high slots, plus obviously with some of the trait descriptions, skills and roll bonuses and things you'll see later on, the Vigilant can actually kick out an astonishing amount of damage for those 5 high slots. The 3 mid slots gives supposedly a decent amount of versatility in regards to things like tackle modules, capacitor warfare, electronic warfare, signal jamming, that kind of thing, but again, thanks to the Vigilant's skills, it is very much leaning towards a certain direction, which we'll talk about later. The 5 low slots are where we start to get a bit more versatility. 5 low slots means you can fit a good amount of tank and still have space for things like weapon upgrades, tracking computers, propulsion systems, that kind of thing. And if you decide you don't need as much tank as perhaps you could fit into those slots, then you can actually work backwards from that and get even more space for more weapon upgrade modules, more propulsion, lots of different versatility we can fit in the low slots here. Now then, on top of that, we then have 3 combat rigs and 3 engineering rigs. Now, something I see sort of misunderstood, I think, about rigs. Rigs are something that people seem to say that there is this right and wrong answer. Oh, you should be fitting these rigs or those rigs. That's not the case. Rigs are there to help you modify the ship towards your own playstyle. Yeah, okay, there are times when, of course, depending on what you want to do, that collision accelerators might be worse than burst aerators. If you're looking for straight raw DPS, then yes, the burst aerators win out, but collision accelerators are going to be far more important if you're looking for alpha strike. Maybe you're not looking for full-on damage, maybe you need a bit of extra survivability. That's when you might want to look at things like screen reinforcers, or some of the shield boosters or armor hardeners and things like that you can fit in rigs. And then on the engineering side, again, you might decide that propulsion is more important to you than certain other things are. You might want to be able to lock onto things faster. It depends what your playstyle is and what you look at, what you're looking for in this particular ship. Don't be drawn into this rigs are right or rigs are wrong thing. There are some, yeah, there are going to be some situations where it is definitely the wrong rigs. If you're putting a Higgs anchor on a Vigilant, you're probably doing it wrong. But stop looking to min-max. This is all about trying to get a playstyle that fits what you want and having fun. Anyway, that's a different rant for a different video. Sorry about that little tangent. The defense of the Vigilant. We're looking at a fairly solid armor structure tank here, 6,164. Solid armor, 5,966. Shields aren't terrible either, 4,546. Now, there is nothing here on the Vigilant. I'll give you a hint now when it comes to the trait descriptions, roles and skills. There is nothing on the Vigilant that suggests that it should be shield tanked or armor tanked. As such, I tend to personally shield tank this, just because I like the extra resistances it has across the board here. This is one of those ships you can get away with armor tanking. It's not terrible armor tanked. I mean, a lot of people who are flying things like this are going to armor tank it. Again, watch my video on why shield tanking is flat out better than armor tanking. You'll understand where I'm coming at here. And the Vigilant does still work as a shield tank. The downside to the Vigilant, however, comes here in its capacitor bank. That capacitor bank is a little bit smaller than perhaps we would like. Obviously, the high slots here are going to be railguns. Railguns do use capacitor. Unlike lasers, however, they don't use as much capacitor as lasers, which is why when you look at Amar ships, they tend to have a very high capacitor because they need to be able to power the lasers that they're going to be firing as well. whereas here on the Vigilant, because it's not built for lasers, it's built for railguns, that capacitor bank is a bit smaller, and it does become very capacitor sensitive, as we'll see later on. Looking at its other stats in that here though, however, signature radius of 90.8 is very small for a cruiser, and flight velocity of 268 is fairly middling to fast as far as cruisers go. We're not going to be properly speed tanking with this thing anytime soon, but it can avoid a lot of incoming damage thanks to that small signature radius and decent flight velocity. Also, that flight velocity, when you twin it with something like an afterburner or a micro warp drive, does give you some fairly high maximum velocities, which is really, really useful with both fits that I will showcase here for the Vigilant. Scan resolution of 325mm. I know it says meters, it should be millimeters. Everywhere else it's millimeters. 325mm, again, is pretty solid. That's enough that you're going to be able to lock onto most targets nice and quickly, whether you're at range or whether you're up close and personal. Again, you might want to augment that with things like the tracking rigs and that kind of thing. But for the most part, I think that's a pretty good scan resolution. If we look at its mass here, it's 9.83 million kilograms and an inertia modifier of 0.38. That's a fairly light ship with a good inertia modifier. It means it is surprisingly nimble for a ship of this size. Obviously, when I say ship of this size, I mean cruiser. It's still a very small signature radius there of 90.8. Warp speed of 3.8 AU per second as well means you can relocate nice and swiftly from A to B. If we look then at the trait descriptions, again, this being a Serpentis Corporation ship, there is no roll bonus here present, it is just the skills, and being a faction cruiser, of course those skills are Advanced Cruiser Command and Advanced Medium Weapon Operation. In this case, Advanced Medium Railgun Operation. That's giving us a bonus of 12% medium railgun damage per level and 10% medium railgun accuracy fall-off. Now, that medium railgun damage, of course, that's 60% at full training, 50% additional accuracy fall-off, and accuracy fall-off actually benefits both snub-nosed and rifled railguns fairly equally, which means the Vigilant does have fits that work with either of those. The Advanced Cruiser Command, though, this is the one I was talking about in regards to mid-slots. Every point you have in Advanced Cruiser Command gives you a 10% increase to stasis webifier strength and optimal range, and a 10% increase to warp disruptor optimal range. First things first, then, obviously that's 50% across the board there. That is only warp disruptors. That does not affect warp scramblers. You put a warp scrambler on, its range is unaffected. Put a warp disruptor on, it gets up to 50% additional optimal range. Same with the webifiers. Stasis webifier, 50% additional range and 50% additional skill. And that is a key part here on how the Vigilant operates. Those stasis webifiers, if you're using something like a Predator stasis webifier, that is going to slow the target ship down by upwards of 90%. It is a massive slowdown, and that's really how the Vigilant operates. Either using those webifiers with rifled railguns to keep your opponent at range and slow anything that gets too close down so that you can blap it with rifled railguns. On the other hand, you can use it as kind of a snare for snub-nosed railguns, stopping a ship escaping. Because it doesn't even matter if they've got a micro warp drive. If you've got a micro warp drive and you're moving at 2,000 meters per second and you get hit with a 90% stasis webifier, you're still dropping down to 200 meters per second, which is slower than the Vigilant. You see the point here. Alrighty then, the first fit that we're going to showcase is of course a rifled railguns long range fit. This is of course done on the Fulmination test server, so I've got full 555 in every single skill across the board, if you're wondering why my numbers might look a little bit different to yours. Again though, remember, once you've got things to advanced 5, that's pretty much the biggest impact you can have as far as skills go. Expert costs a lot of skill points and a lot of ISK to open up. That is ISK that is better used probably putting into things like the modules. If you're trying to decide whether or not you should go from advanced 5 weapon operation to expert 5 weapon operation, or if you should take your loot from meta level 8 up to meta level 11, the meta level 8 to meta level 11 is a much bigger increase than getting all the way to expert 5 is. Get all of your skills to advanced 5, then come back and worry about expert once the ship is fully fitted. Anyway, so of course here we are looking at a rifled railgun build. The advantage of medium rifled railguns is of course their range. Here I've got a full brace of Corellum C-type medium rifled railguns. Now, rifled railguns, medium rifles, have a optimal range of 22.5 and an accuracy fall-off of 20.25. That means we're not even at 50% effectiveness. Once we're at 40 kilometers, we're better than 50 at 40 kilometers, and we only drop down to not hitting at just over 60 kilometers. So there's a good amount of range that this thing can kick out there, and again, that optimal range here, 22.5, does tie in quite nicely with the Predator Stasis Webifier having its extended range, courtesy of the Vigilance bonuses, to 22.2. This means you sit at 22 kilometers, you orbit things, you hold them in place with that Stasis Webifier that, as you saw there, drops it down by 91.5% flight velocity. That drops them to basically not moving at all. The rifled railguns there have no problem with tracking, even though that tracking speed of 13 is absolutely abysmal. It's more than enough to deal with something that's barely moving at all, thanks to the Stasis Webifiers. And remember, if you put both Stasis Webifiers on, the first one takes you down to 90%, the second one reduces that middle gap again by another 90%. So it'll take you to essentially a 99% slowdown. That takes a ship to an absolute crawl. Nothing is going to struggle to hit at that point in time. Basically, that's the advantage here of using the rifled railguns. You want to keep things at the 22 kilometer mark. You use the webs to stop anything getting closer than that, and the massive reduction in speed means that the rifled railguns have no trouble whatsoever actually applying that damage, and the damage here you can see from those is 802.65. Now, because we are getting the increase to the Predator Warp Disruptor range as well, you can see here 45 kilometers range on that, and I've chosen to fit one of these. You don't necessarily have to fit one of these. Ultimately, the main reason I've gone for this is because it leans into those roll bonuses, and if I'm getting caught in PvP, if I'm doing anomalies and someone jumps in, I want to be able to lock them down and punish them for daring to think they can take on a Vigilant. That's why we have the Warp Disruptor. If you are dedicated PvE, like you're just going to be running combat encounters, like the news encounters that are private, or you're doing storyline missions or things like that, this can be swapped out for something like a Target Painter. A Target Painter is an excellent option for you here, as you can be shooting things as they approach before they hit your Webifier range. Obviously, your guns here, as I said, can theoretically hit up to 60 kilometers away. If you make the signature radius bigger with a Target Painter, at 60 kilometers you're going to be able to apply some damage. Once they then hit the 22 kilometer mark, that's when your Webifiers come into effect there. Now, in regards to low slots, because this is a ranged sort of semi-kiting build, of course range control is an important factor in how we fit this ship. Gistum C-type medium micro warp drive. Yeah, it takes off 25% off the top of our capacity, but it does give us a massive flight velocity here of 564%. My goodness, what on earth happened to my tongue there? 564% flight velocity is massive. It gets us from A to B, relocates nice and quickly. It does use a massive amount of capacitor, and of course it blooms our signature radius by 413%. So you're basically looking at a ship that's 400 meters on the signature radius with it active, but you're only going to activate it for one cycle, literally just enough to get you to range, then you open fire with your railguns and you take things out from distance again. This means we've got a little bit of space here for things like a Corellum C-type magnetic field stabilizer, weapon upgrade module, additional damage, faster activation time, activate it for an even bigger boost. You know the drill by now. On the other side of things then, a large shield booster, because we can fit it comfortably into the power grid. As you can see, we've actually still got some power grid spare here, about 261 actually, which is not a small amount at all. We've still got a good amount of power grid spare there. The large shield booster, we don't have to activate this often. I mean, you can see there that the capacitor here is very weak at 1 minute 32, and that's with me having two Gistum C-type medium capacitor batteries. The reason I have two of these is in case you're going up against a ship that has neutralizers or lots of Nosferatus. I can activate both of those batteries, give myself a massive injection into my capacitor, whilst using my shield to rep up any damage that I'm taking, use micro warp drive, that kind of thing. I don't necessarily recommend activating both at the same time. Activate one, then activate the second one as the first one comes off cooldown, or as you need it. Ultimately, you can probably get away with just one. The reason I've got two is simply for those elites in some of the storyline missions that do use things like neutralizers and heavy Nosferatu Nosferatus, you know, you're getting a lot of drain on your capacitor. Having 2 batteries helps keep that upright. If you have 1 battery, you can swap the other one for another magnetic field stabilizer, or some more tank or something if you feel that you need a bit more resistance. But ultimately, this is designed around the idea that I'm going to be neutralized by some of the rats in some of those high power missions. If you're not going into those missions and you're not getting neutralized, then yeah, swap that battery for something else. Now, as far as the rig slots here go, in the combat rigs, I've gone for 2 railgun burst aerators and a collision accelerator. Now, I'm not worried too much here about the alpha strike. If I wanted to make sure that I was one-shotting as many things as possible, this is a situation where you'd put the collision accelerators in over burst aerators, but for straight up DPS, 2 burst aerators and 1 collision accelerator is your best bet. Again, if you're finding that this ship is taking too much damage for your liking, you can swap the collision accelerator here for something like the anti-electromagnetic screen reinforcer to reduce the amount of EM damage that you're taking, or even the rigs that like increase the size of your shield. You can even go for things like the one that reduces the amount of capacity that your shield booster requires, that kind of thing. I would probably go for the one that gives you bigger shields. Bigger tank is nice, and they're also dirt cheap on the market. Now, as far as the engineering rigs go, auxiliary thrusters, again, the 3 engineering rigs here are very much up to your personal preference and what you feel fits your playstyle a bit better. For me, I've gone for auxiliary thrusters because I like to be able to know that if I activate that micro warp drive and I move me from A to B, I'm going to do so at a very quick rate, and indeed you can see if I open up the navigation here, 442 meters per second before activating that the micro warp drive there. That is a very fast cruiser. On the other hand, then I've got 2 semiconductor memory cells. Best way to get a bigger capacitor. That's because on this side of things, as we saw earlier, we are not capacitor stable by any amount at all. I am going to be using quite a lot of things on capacitor, and I'm basing this around me going up against those anomalies that do have things like neutralizers and Nosferatus in. Again, if you're not going against those particular anomalies, you may find you don't need this much capacitor, at which point you could look into something like, for example, the ability to lock on faster using targeting relays, or heck, you might decide that you want to fit some more tanking modules in there, maybe 2 large shield boosters, get a little bit of extra power grid. Honestly, the locking I think is probably going to be the better one. The target relays are going to be your best option if you're not going straight there for additional capacitor. Here we are then at the end of Wave 1 of Bad Hair Day Part 1. I know a lot of you say, you know, can you show us Part 2? Ultimately, it takes me an awful long time to clear through the entire thing, come back, and then do it all again for footage, having made sure that it works. So I'm just showcasing here Part 1 to showcase how this works. Again, with the fit that we've got, with the batteries and things like that, it should be clear that nothing that comes in the second part of the fight, none of those heavy elites actually pose a major threat. Anyway, so damage here as well, I just need to point out, this is while we've got the bug on fulmination still that is showcasing the rats with the incredibly high resistances. This has since been fixed. It means that targets are not actually quite as heavy and slow to take out as this normally. Anyway, as the wave goes down, you'll see I've activated the micro warp drive so that I can boost off into the distance. I've only activated it for a single cycle. I'm opening up the ship menu, going down here, we've got Condor 2 interceptors, Cormorant covert ops, we lock onto those. There we are, and now we can individually start to take these on. Approach, hit there for the damage. There's a warp scrambler on me. Oh no, that's going to stop my poor little micro warp drive. We activate those webifiers. That Condor 2 is now barely moving at all. When we activate the gunshots here, you'll see rifled railgun, hit, straight hit. That's not even a graze, that was a hit straight through there. Onto the Cormorant. Again, those webifiers aren't even active actually this time, and we're still hitting it quite comfortably. As we move away from it, lock onto everything else. There we go, that Cormorant's going to go down next hit, and we're away from the small ships now, already onto the bigger ones, things like the mowers, the ravens, the strikers, that kind of thing here, the Ferox 2 Guardians. And you'll see I'm not really taking all that much damage at all. Those ships went down very quickly thanks to those rifled railguns doing their thing. Now as I approach this Python mower, and we're drifting in slowly, we're taking a bit of damage, mainly due to me having no angular velocity at all in regards to this entire fleet, pretty much. But we're coming in nicely. getting in towards optimal range now, and you'll see we're hitting for a bit more damage. Obviously these are shield tank ships, and as I said, this was filmed and recorded during the point where the Fulmination test server had ridiculously high resistances on every single one of the rats. So you see they do take a little bit longer to go down here than perhaps they do on the live server. Now yes, I know some of you are going to be saying, but hang on the live server they move a lot faster. Well yeah, but that doesn't really matter when you've got webifiers that drop a target's movement speed by 91% now, does it? So I think it showcases quite nicely here. We can kick out a good amount of damage, although this mower, I tell you now, is going to take ages to go down because for some reason it just shield boosts out the absolute wazoo. I'm looking through the footage now, I can actually see that there is a remote shield booster on it that I failed to notice whilst doing this encounter. Had I done that and taken out the remote shield booster, this mower might go down that little bit faster, but you can see how quickly those shields are boosting back up thanks to the high resistances here on the server. I can activate the battery for a big booster capacitor, activate that large shield booster, and here actually I think I accidentally leave it running for entirely too long, so it chews through all of that extra capacitor and starts chewing through the rest, and that mower just will not go down. It's quite embarrassing actually looking at this, because it's quite clear you can see the remote shield booster there coming from whichever battleship that is in the distance, and I kind of have to sit there and think, why on earth didn't I retarget and go for that battleship? I mean, I must have been wondering why on earth that mower was taking so long to go down. So at this point, normally, as I say, I go from the smaller ships to the larger ships. Obviously the frigates and destroyers tend to be your high profile targets, because if they get too close they can cause problems, they can be difficult to deal with. Not really the case here with the Vigilant, thanks to those stasis webifiers, but the idea is that you get rid of those hard ones and then you move on to the mediums and then into the large ships as you go. It also means the small ones tend to die quicker than cruisers and battle cruisers, and if you can take the number, if you've got 10 ships and you can get rid of 3 of them in the time three small ones in the time it would take you to get rid of 1 cruiser, do that, because it's 3 less ships you have to worry about. It's 3 less loads of damage coming in, 3 loads less of electronic warfare and that kind of thing there. At this point I'm now trying to see, is that interdictor like getting some kind of remote heal, but it's now actually taking the damage, so I'm not entirely sure what happened there, but it's now taking that damage and down it goes on to the next target. Basically what I'm trying to say here is that with the Vigilant you can probably get away actually with not necessarily going for the smallest targets in order. In certain cases, like there, you may decide that actually taking out whichever battleship it was that was doing that that remote shield boosting, that should probably have died first, at which point I can then move on and take out the rest. But at this point, even here, you can see when I move on to this second mower, that's not being remote shield boosted and it is actually going down remarkably quickly. Still very comfortable here on my capacitor. Remember, this is the ship that's got less than 2 minutes of capacitor time on it, yet here we are halfway through wave 2 and I'm still sitting at 70% capacitor and 89% shield, so definitely effective, and it just takes a bit of time to cut through things. As I said, this is with the heavy resistance bug on rats on the Fulmination server, but we're getting there. We're getting there, and I can guarantee you, as I said, this continues on through here. It takes a bit of time to get through these ships. Once we get through this into the next couple of waves, nothing else really poses a problem. Later on in part 2, there is a very fast moving elite Condor 2 interceptor that does have a scram, but again, when you put 2 webs on it, it's not moving at all, and it gets blapped in about 3 hits from there. Very easy target to take out, not a threat at all, and I quite like this playstyle here with the Vigilant. Long range, keep them at distance using the webifiers, and then blap them off the grid. Now, of course, I mentioned earlier that the Vigilant's roll bonuses to its webifiers can either be used to keep opponents at arm's reach or to stop them running away, and the stop them running away ideal comes to a fruition here with the Vigilant Brawler build, which of course is going to be using medium snub-nosed railguns. Here, a full brace of Corellum C-type medium snub-nosed railguns. The advantage of these is their absolutely monstrous DPS, 218 DPS per turret. It's an insane amount. Heck, you can see there 1092.14 DPS cold. That's before we activate any weapon upgrade modules. 1092 DPS cold. That is monstrous. The downside is that is only at an optimal range of 4.5 kilometers with an accuracy fall off of 9.72. So if you're anything more than basically 10 kilometers away from your target, you're not really applying all that much damage. You're down to about 75% effectiveness at the 10 kilometer mark. Once you hit 15 kilometers, you're at 50%, and it's just all downhill from there. The other side of things though as well is that tracking speed. 75.5 is pretty high for a medium turret. It's still not overly high in the grand scheme of things, and this would normally struggle against those smaller, faster moving ships like interceptors and covert ops destroyers. However, the Vigilant has those stasis webifiers, and when you hit something with a 91.5% reduction to its speed, it doesn't really matter how poor your tracking is or how small their signature radius is, they almost come to a full stop right next to you. You laugh, they die, it's a happy time had by all, well, except for the guy who died obviously. Now, because we're going to be so close this time, we have swapped out the Warp Disruptor for a Warp Scrambler. Again, remember, the Scrambler does not get any bonuses from those Warp Disruptor skills. We do not get additional optimal range here from Advanced Cruiser Command. It is straight up 15 kilometers here from the Predator Warp Scrambler. The main reason for this, again, is to either lock down a target that thinks it can take me on and stop it running away. Again, no Warp Scrambler means no Micro Warp Drive. No Micro Warp Drive means you're using your basic flight velocity, and then I'm also hitting you with a Stasis Webifier, which is at 91% effective, so you're dropped all the way down to literally like 20 meters per second. It's an insane shutdown. Anything that comes within 15 kilometers here of this Vigilant is going to be basically not moving, and I love it. It's hilarious when that happens. Now, to help keep this all running, this time around, we can add a Vraikolakis Medium Energy Nosferatu. This has the range here, optimal range of 12 kilometers and accuracy fall off of 7, but if we're at our 5 to 10 kilometer margin that we're looking at for the snub-nosed railguns, we are in its optimal range, getting optimal energy transfer here, which helps us run our other systems. Now, this means that this is not quite as capacitor sensitive as the long range build, but then again, obviously the long range build, we don't have everything active at once. Here, almost everything is going to be switched on all the time. Now, for the tanking side of things, I've gone for an adaptive armor hardener and a large armor repairer. I think that there is a great I think that's a great way of tanking. I think armor tanking is in a bad place. You can swap this for shield tanking if you're skilled into it, but as you'll see in the demonstration in a moment, the large armor repairers do actually work here, as with alongside that armor hardener there, and it's not as capacitor aggressive. I've got a large armor hardener alongside that, a large armor repairer alongside that armor hardener, and I'm still getting 7 minutes of capacitor time out of this. Now, of course, to get those insane DPS figures, I've got 2 C-type magnetic field stabilizers. Again, that's 1092 DPS on cold, whereas we're looking much more now. Once you activate both of those, you get some incredibly high sustained DPS out of these things. Seriously insane damage that this can kick out at those ranges. Again, if you decide that you're finding you're getting a little bit too soft on things here, you could add another armor hardener or indeed another armor repairer, although it'll be a medium armor repairer at that point. You can also possibly, at this point, consider swapping out there things like a battery, just to help you maintain a bit more capacitor stability. If you're going for shield boosting and shield tanking, you may need to try and get a battery in there just to help support things a little bit more. Finally then, for propulsion, I've gone for a medium afterburner this time, because I don't want to take that chew off at the top of the maximum capacitor capacity, but I do want to still be able to move between my targets nice and quickly. Also remember that if you've got an afterburner or a micro warp drive active, yes, not only does that make your angular velocity higher against your target, but due to how the symmetry of angles works, that means your opponent has a higher angular velocity as well, and you are going to struggle to track even if you're taking your target down to basically not moving, thanks to that webifier. Now, it's worth mentioning that if you're not overly worried about anything with a micro warp drive, you could swap this for another stasis webifier. If you don't have the money for a warp scrambler, for example, 2 stasis webifiers works as well, because you've got the 90% reduction from the first one. The second one then reduces the 10% remaining by a further 90%, dropping you down to literally like 1% of its total movement speed. Even with a micro warp drive, again, if someone's using a micro warp drive and moving at 2,000 meters per second, you drop them down to 200, you drop them then down to 20. So it does still shut them down quite nicely, but it's not quite as effective as having the warp scrambler, and the warp scrambler obviously can stop them warping away as well. Now again, for the rigs here, things are pretty similar to what we had before. 2 burst aerators and a collision accelerator for that massive DPS. On the other side, I've gone for an auxiliary thruster, a dynamic fuel valve, just so that we reduce the amount of capacitor required for the afterburner, because it's going to be active all the time. and a semiconductor memory cell again, just to increase the amount of capacitor that we actually have available to us, which means we don't run out quite as quickly, because this is quite capacitor sensitive, and you may have to switch things on and off as the fight goes on. I tend to find that when I hit the last mob in a wave, I tend to actually switch my weapons off for a bit and just orbit it with nothing else on. If I'm not taking damage, just orbit it and Nosferatu myself back up to full, finish the target off, and then move into the next wave. But we'll showcase that just now. Now this is part 2 of Sweet Poison. Sweet Poison obviously is the Galente Federation Tech 10 storyline encounter. I decided this time that going through part 1 was so easy and straightforward that part 2 I should probably just hit record and go for it anyway. And I'm kind of thinking, you know what, I may as well just do that. You know, if I lose the ship, it's still kind of, it's footage there and then. Anyway, this is still, as I mentioned in the other section, but in case you skipped ahead, this is with the bug earlier that meant that rats had ridiculously high resistances, so they do take a long time to go down. Anyway, next wave has just spawned, so we are going to double tap into the distance there, move towards a distant point just to get a bit of range. We're going to go down the list and lock onto those small targets first of all. So H-2 interceptors, catalyst, covert ops, that kind of thing. They are going to be our main threat, and my goodness, that's a lot of interceptors. Don't think I can lock onto all of those. Yes, I actually can. No, I can't. It wouldn't let me get that last one. Oh well, right, okay, so as these things start approaching now, obviously they are massively out of range of my snub-nosed railguns. I am going to move in a straight line pretty much, diagonally off to the side here, and start to work on these. That's in range there, that H-2 interceptor. We're going to hit it with the scrambler and with the webifier just in case, and there you are. You see it goes right the way down to almost no movement speed at all as it comes on sideways, and that webifier starts to take effect. It's going to start taking a few hits. There we go, we are through its shields, going into its armor. I'm moving at a very high angular velocity for it, so if I double tap like that, you see I drop my angular velocity. Symmetry of angles means it loses its angular velocity. Blap, down it goes onto the catalyst covert ops that is currently, I think, is that one that's scramming me? No, it's the H-2 interceptor there that's scramming me. We're going to work on that one. Armor tank holding quite comfortably here. You see, I'm not even really having to use the large armor repair. I'm going to give it one cycle now, just in case I take a load of damage between me activating and it finishing. But you can see I'm just blapping off these small targets one by one by one. Activate that webifier, slow it right down, let the snub-nosed railguns do the rest. The large armor repairer is more than sufficient to tank this damage. It doesn't use all that much in the way of capacitor either, and you can see that Nosferatu is going to help keep me topped up once I'm on targets. There we go, are in range. Obviously most things here are in range quite comfortably of that Nosferatu. On to the next catalyst. Still scrammed, 3 signal disruptors, sensor dampeners, sorry, and 4 Nosferatus. I would like to take some of those Nosferatus off just in case they're affecting me in any way, but you can see, hit everything, no problems here at all. Even the really fast moving small ships, lock onto them no problem, lock onto them nice and quickly thanks to the sensor strength of the Vigilant here. Then when I move on to a target, I can webify it and scrambler it as well, so that it's moving incredibly slowly. Obviously it takes a few moments for the webifier to actually catch up. It's not like you hit someone with a webifier and bam, they're at 10% of their movement speed. It does take a few seconds obviously for them to decelerate to that point. Here again you can see one that's moving a little bit too fast for me to track. So we're going to move around another target here, which will change our angular velocity against that first H-2 interceptor. Bam, there we go, almost down in one hit. Second one hopefully should take rid of that. There it goes, that's that one down, and same thing, we're just going to dance between these different ships. We're going to lock onto individual ones, then orbit a different one so that we sort of swing around and keep our angular velocity nice and low. Another alternative way of doing this, of course, is to use your engine there on the bottom left next to the HED and drop that down to like 3% or 5%, that kind of thing. Just drop your movement speed manually. Obviously switching off the afterburner would help as well, but I just like doing the little double taps of manual piloting. Now the downside of that obviously is I have taken a bit of damage there through that double tapping and dropping my angular velocity right down. Again, it's nothing that my tank can't handle. We are losing a little bit here to the capacitor. That has been mainly thanks to me actually not having my Nosferatu running on the correct targets that entire time, but it's already beginning to fill. As long as it doesn't go too far below 25, 30-25%, we'll be absolutely fine. And spoiler alert, it doesn't. We're quite comfortable here. It's just that manual piloting to make sure these little small ships, because there are dozens of them in this wave, you saw how many there are. That's entirely too many interceptors and covert ops destroyers, but hey, there we go. Still sitting above 30% capacitor. That Corelli Catalyst covert ops should be going down. If only the drone were on that one as well, we'd be doing a little bit more damage. But hey, there we are. That's my own fault. I've actually come a little bit too far away from that covert ops now. I'm out of range properly of my snub-nosed. That's not good. That's not how we want to be. So let's move back in towards that. There it goes off the grid onto that Atron 2 interceptor, and you can kind of see where this is going. We're now down to about 30% on the capacitor because I messed up a little bit there. I came a little bit too far out of range. We're still above 25%. It's still all gravy at this point. We're still not going to be losing capacitor at any dangerous rate, and we can quite comfortably handle that. Let's get this Atron 2 interceptor down next, and then we'll move on to that Catalyst covert ops, at which point, again, I've kind of showcased that we can handle these waves quite comfortably, and that's with the two, not gyro stabilizers, magnetic field stabilizers. They're active as well. As was pointed out to me in the comment section of another video, I like to just double tap these because I want those big hits for Alpha Strike, but for overall DPS, it is better to cycle them. Don't have both going at once. Activate one. When it's deactivated, that's when you activate your second one, and you can keep yourself going with a nice sort of constant cycling of the magnetic field stabilizers. Anyway, so there we are. We have taken rid of all the small ships now. We can now focus on the larger ones, which are going to be a little bit easier for me to hit. Capacitor is now dangerously low. Again, that's thanks to me not really getting proper cycles off the Nosferatu. That's an important point. A Nosferatu takes from the enemy ship at the beginning of activation, and it dumps it into yours at the end of activation. So if you kill a ship before the Nosferatu finishes activating, I don't think you actually get the full amount of capacitor from it. That can be a problem if you're not cycling them properly. So anyway, you'll see now that the capacitor is healing. We're back over 30%. Which is more than enough. Once we're at 30%, things will start filling up nicely. We're taking less damage here, so I can actually turn the armor repair off for a bit of time. It's just surviving that massive wave of interceptors and covert ops destroyers, which, as you've seen, the Vigilant here can comfortably do. And there we have it, the Serpentis Corporation Vigilant in a nutshell. Now, between those two fits, between the long range and the snub nose, I don't know which one actually I prefer more, whether you're using your webs as a snare to keep them in range of your snub nose railguns, or whether you're using the webs as a way to keep your opponent at arm's reach so that your rifled railguns can keep up with them. I think the Vigilant is an incredibly powerful ship. I'll be honest, as I've mentioned in the Thorax video, I'm not a huge fan of how this hull looks, but as far as how the ship plays, this one is certainly enjoyable, and it is a very powerful ship, as you would imagine from a faction cruiser. Nothing quite like a Vigilant here to really put the fear of God into your opponents when they jump into an anomaly, see a Vigilant there, and you both disrupt them and hit them with those webifiers. They're going nowhere, at which point you can just rip them apart with impunity. It's kind of almost got a similar feel to things like the Ashimu, but that does it obviously by capping off your capacitor. Here it just absolutely holds you in place. It's like, you know, putting you in a vice grip, stopping you running away and making sure that they can really apply the maximum amount of damage. Hopefully though that's given you a bit of inspiration. I know a lot of you folks have been asking about the Vigilant. Sorry it's taken me this long to get around to it, but I hope that has been worth the wait to showcase to you all what fits I've been using on this and why I actually think this is a very powerful ship. I think this is right up there actually. The Phantasm is probably slightly better for PvE, but I would argue this is as good, well, considerably better actually than the Phantasm for PvP, just probably not quite as good as the Ashimu for PvP, but still very good. It's better than the Ashimu is at PvE, so it's kind of that. If you're the kind of person who likes a good mix of PvE and PvP, this is probably the best faction cruiser for you because it's bloody good in PvE and it's very powerful in PvP as well, just slightly beaten by the Ashimu. Anyway folks, that does wrap it all up, so thank you for watching right the way to the end. Let me know what you think of the Vigilant, let me know if you're flying this ship and tell me some cool stories about what you've been up to in it. Otherwise, happy sailing and see you in New Eden!